Let me get started, and thanks for joining us here today for the end of August Nano user update. A couple of things we'll be discussing today, and you'll also begin to see kind of a changing shift in what we're talking about in these user meetings. So we're focusing them to be a little bit more of a community update in the future, having a little bit more information on tool moves as we're beginning the phase 2 tool move later this fall. Today we'll still spend some time talking about the ramp up and the training in the last month. So as we're transitioning and reopening the facilities, we'll have a little bit of an update on the building 39 humidity. That was an issue in July, and so we'll have some more data on that and insights. And then a couple of small things like by request, a way to find a live view of your fab fee and your spending. We'll have finally a good update on the external user access and a path for that. And then at the end, I want to explain a little bit about how this meeting fits in the other activities that we're starting to create on engaging with the community and getting insights from the users. So to start, what actually happened in August? So this graph I showed you last time up to July, mid-July or so, this is a number of tool users per day. So how many equipment engages were there on a single day as a function of time. And you can see that we're now sort of in the 60s per day. You also notice the building 39 facilities work that took place after the around the 4th of July weekend. And that had sort of the equivalent impact of a 1 week loss of tool usage from that shutdown. If I sort of average it out, you can see it kind of reverberated over maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Right now we're at about 300 tool uses per week. And how does that compare to what happened last year? So if we take the August 2019 data, we had about 385 uses per week or 65 per day. So we're getting closer to what the levels we used to be a year ago. And that's really encouraging, of course. This is the number of tool users. The other question you may have as well, how about the number of people and what they do? So we can look at that as well. So both for users and the number of research groups, right? How many people and how many different labs are utilizing the facility right now in August. So here's the data for that. Groups obviously fewer than users. Users is the total number, right? So we have currently, for instance, yesterday or the day before, we had about 25 users in the lab that day, and they came from 15 different research groups, right? That's how to read this graph. Again, you see the impact of the Fab 39 facilities update or shutdown there. Again, compared to 2019, where we saw in August about 32 users and 21 groups per weekday. So we're getting, again, close to what was the average, but we're still not quite there. I could also take this data and group it by week, because it's maybe a little bit more insightful to look at it, what happened, and lumped everything together into a week. So on a typical week right now, we've seen about 30 or so, maybe 35 different research groups utilizing the clean room, and maybe 60 or so different users being in the labs that particular week. Right? And you can see that has gradually increased. So if I look at this data and take a step back and say, well, what does it tell me? I would draw two conclusions. The first, well, actually, before I draw the conclusion, I want to compare this to 2019. So last year we had, for the same time frame in August, about 89 users on average, so much more people, and 47 groups per week. Right? So the conclusion I'm going to draw from this is two different conclusions for each graph. First is not everyone is back yet, right? We've seen way more users last year, a lot more research groups last year, perhaps, than what we see now. At the same time, those people that are back are pretty busy, as we see, right? Because we almost are back to the same number of users per day level, yet not the same numbers of users per week, right? So the people that are back are in the lab very frequently and working hard. And if we take the average or the total for the entire June through August period this year, we get about 63 different research groups, 115 different users, and roughly 2,200 tool uses that they have done in the last 2 or so months. I can also, again, if I want to compare to 2019, there was no ramp up in 2019, so I'm just going to focus on August or the last 30 days, where we've seen, 57 research groups, 96 users, 1,200 users, and that compares to August 19, relatively well, right? So a little bit fewer research groups. Again, not everyone is back yet, so you can see that in this data. But the users, the 96 users that are here, are very heavily using the lab, more than the 160 were a year ago. Now, what does it actually mean to be busy? I keep saying people are busy. Well, here is the data. This is a histogram of how many people are in the lab, or how many days in the lab a person has been there, right? So x-axis number of days, y-axis how many users were in the lab for that many days. Obviously, you see a lot of light users, people coming in once or twice, 3 times perhaps, to do a specialty step, maybe characterize something, maybe deposit a thin film, and then go back to the research group and continue their work there. But you also see a couple of heavier users, and at the upper end here, someone who in the 71 possible days since we started reopening was in the lab or utilized equipment for 49 out of 71 days. And I'm probably not allowed to disclose that person's identity, because he or she may just everybody will probably hire that student away. So we'll keep it a secret. But also important to note that this user actually was not even a 24-hour user until recently, right? So for those that really are working hard and have to be in the lab every single day, that seems to be quite feasible. That's great. In addition to reopening or ramping up the facility, we also have started to ramp up the training more heavily in August. And there are kind of 3 different categories of trainings that we're currently offering, apart from the tool training, which I'm not showing here. So this is really the new user type of training, right? 14 different training times that we had, mostly in August. And they broke down into orientations, which is really aimed at new users that have not been MIT.nano users in the past. It breaks down into quick starts, which is the new to the fab, new to the clean room, 1-day hands-on training. So let's say a new graduate student joins and has never worked in the clean room before. This is after the orientation, the follow-up to get some hands-on experience. And then finally, the wet chemical processing, which is really designed for new and existing users, right, who want to accelerate how to get access to the wet benches. Now we have okay. If we look at the overall data for the people that went through these trainings, 69 people overall. I think 37 of them were actually completely new MIT.nano users, and they came from those 69 people came from a whole range of different departments and from different user categories, mostly postdocs and graduate students, as you see in this table. Right. That's really exciting to see, because it means that MIT.nano is still, the new users are still coming in from all over the institute, and everybody is finding a way to join. The other thing that we're looking at very heavily now is finding ways to adjust how we introduce people to the building, right? In the past, that used to be in person. That was sort of 2019. Okay, the Zoom versions, this is what we're doing right now. This is the 2020.5, I guess, and then maybe the 2020.6 onwards. Greater, well, other way around, I guess. Whatever. 2020.6 forward is going to be more asynchronous, and what we want to do is introduce most of the materials through video to the user, so you can watch it as you please on whatever time you want. We started making some of those. You can see here a little snapshot of some of the gowning videos we made, and so it helps convey that content, without having to drag people through a 2 or 3 hour Zoom session, which is really tiring. It also has another side benefit, and that is it allows us to show not only what to do, it also allows us to show what you shouldn't be doing, which is usually very difficult to demonstrate, right? So here we might say, well, walk slowly in the clean room, don't do what I'm doing there. And so that hopefully gives another completely different aspects to trainings that we weren't able to show in the past. I actually have that video as a Zoom background, so if if you need that, let me know. Now, switching gears, in July, we had a lot of difficulty with the humidity in building 39 after the facility shut down, and there was a lot of frustration. And so we presented some of the insights in the last two meetings and also through some of the emails. But I want to highlight something else that just came online yesterday, and that is the monitoring system for the Fab 39 humidity. So people had suggested a couple of weeks ago that why don't we post, let's say, daily what the humidity is, so they understand whether it's worthwhile to come into the lab or not. And we started doing that, and we began posting daily humidity. Paul had sent emails on snapshots of what the system looks like. And in the meantime, we also began working on a more automated way to do this. So this was really just the manual postings was just to bridge the time. And if you think about what would we like to see, well, as a user, I may want to go back and say, what was the humidity, last Thursday at 10 o'clock when I did my lithography because something went wrong, I think. So we want to see historic data as well as current data. And it should really be possible to see that both on your computer or your cell phone. And so the system right now is measuring in TRL, and you'll be able to go to fab-weather or fab-weather.mit.edu, and you'll be able to see it both compatible with your cell phone display as well as your as a desktop computer browser, right? And so there you can go back in time. You can look at the current conditions. You can look at what happened at a point in the past. You can see it started recording. We put it in on Monday, so you obviously don't have data before that. It's also kind of neat. This, if you were on this call earlier when Paul was explaining some of the air handler activities, you can see that what Paul mentioned is actually this spike in humidity that we saw about 11:40 a.m. this morning, right? So that was actually due to an activity in the building in terms of balancing out humidity between the upper and the lower clean rooms in building 39, right? So hopefully this is useful. It also serves a much broader purpose actually as a way to create a system that allows us to present data to the users, whether this is in this case kind of just humidity or in the future other data, right? So it's kind of an exploratory tool for us to get feedback and see how do we communicate automated data that we may collect in building 12 as well as 39 out to you. We also had, again, so we're sort of now in the rapid fire, lots of different things. So again, switching topics. We had another interesting request, and that was, brought forward and say, well, as a PI or as the administrator of an account or even as a student, is there a way to see the month-to-date spending that a user has done or a lab has done? Because it often can help to better manage the accounts, right? So you don't accidentally overspend one account and have to go back through all kinds of administrative adjustments. And so the Coral team took that challenge up and added that to the cost recovery module. This is a link, and we'll have that link also later on Friday's email, so you don't have to remember it. But nanomls.mit/cost recovery. And the way that works is you can log into that module. You can go to the most recent months, for example, August, that's still ongoing. Within August, you could then say, well, let me go and look at the billing period charges for August. And that brings up a spreadsheet, right? And in that spreadsheet, you see if you're one user, you'll only see your data. If you're a PI, you see your entire lab. You'll see what the users have done in terms of tools and in terms of process units or overall build costs, right? And so you can then go back and say, hey, wait, over here, this Parallene tool, I actually wasn't on it for 3 days straight, causing $400 of charges. Maybe that was a mistake. And that's really useful because it allows you to see these charges and also past tool charges. But by seeing it during the month as it's running, you can spot errors a little bit more easily. Those corrections are much easier to make than 3 months later when the bill has been issued and paid, right? So hopefully that's something that you'll find very helpful in reducing some of the surprises, frustrations, or remove some of the murkiness perhaps and help you better understand how to use the lab, right? And so again, let us know how this works out. hopefully this will help facilitate. When you see something that isn't right, you can always go back into Coral and mark it for review. So you don't even have to send an email. You just say, hey, flag this particular past use and say, can this be reviewed? Because you know what? I wasn't on the tool for 3 days. I was only on it for 2 hours. Now, last meeting, we still had not quite had clarity on the external user access. That has changed, so we're really excited about this. MIT has relatively recently provided a path for external users and guidelines along with that. And so we tested it out successfully last week, and it went pretty nice and very smoothly. And so we are pretty happy with that. And if you're an external user and you want to regain access to campus, just send us an email, MIT.nano feedback@mit.edu, and then we'll help you get set up and go through the process. It's really just filling out a form of information that MIT needs for the setup in the system to help contact trace, and then we can accommodate and you'll proceed from there. The last thing I want to explain a little bit is this meeting, as well as some of the other things that we have done. So the goal of that we have is really sort of two different modes by which we talk to the user community, right? It's either MIT Nano driven, or it's user driven, or perhaps anywhere in between. MIT Nano driven type of discussions are really this meeting, right? The community updates, monthly user meetings. This is where we convey information out to the user community, but it doesn't really provide an easy venue to get a lot of user-driven feedback to us, right? Because it's often hard with 40 or 50 participants for people to speak up or have kind of more candid discussions. And one thing we had tried was to start the weekly user emails. So you can ask your questions to MIT Nano feedback, and we'll answer those and send out anonymous questions, and then send out the digest on Friday with the answers. And so we get a couple of questions there. Feel free to ask more detailed things if that's of interest. And it also allows us an opportunity to provide announcements, so we don't have to aggregate them for an entire month. But then, in addition to that, we really just are lacking the user-driven communication. So for that, we've added weekly chats or office hours, or I'm going to call them for now the Happy Complaint Hour social. You can sign up for that. It's every Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Sign up for it on this link over here. That requires an MIT certificate, so we don't get spammed with random people wanting to complain that is not fab relevant from somewhere else around the world. So Zoom link is in that sign up. It's also in the Friday emails. So feel free to join us every Wednesday, 6 o'clock. And it really can be about anything. It's really between improvements, random chats, and office hours. So it really has no fixed agenda. Right? But it's an opportunity for us to be in a small discussion with just a couple of people, or potentially even one-on-one. Now, I want to focus a little bit on these weekly emails and the structure of those, and how that has evolved in the last couple of weeks, because we started to change the content a little bit. Right now, this is the structure, right? I might send an email. The email goes out every Friday at 11:30 p.m. It's being sent to the MIT Nano Fab users, because it's primarily Fab-related issues. And so in that email, we have new questions that were asked to feedback. We have potentially follow-ups on past questions if we get more information or get more insights. And then other types of announcements and links to training, announcements, tool-related, and so on. And in addition to that, we'll have attachments, because you'll see why I have attachments shortly. But attachments can be either more in-depth answers, like here are a possible list of vendors for a certain activity or certain method or process that we can't accommodate ourselves, or it has a second attachment will be a tool status, right? So every week we'll have a tool status of the key sort of high demand tools that may currently have problems, that may have something going on, and any update will be in red, so you can see what has been updated from week to week, so you don't have to reread the whole thing, because that gets kind of boring. Again, if you have questions about the tool status and something isn't explained as well as you would like, again, send us an email and we'll accommodate that. So we arrived at this structure by initially having in email format, there was just sort of the weekly digest email with announcements, with everything. Sometimes an attachment, like if I looked at the humidity data, for example, I could add that. And so that was the first, last week of July, we started that. The next weekend or next week, we had the same. And then, last week I started having a lot of details. And so it began not to look like the weekly digest email, but more like the weekly indigest. And so this Friday, we decided, well, maybe it's better to shrink that down a little bit and add the attachments so you can focus on a short email, well, relatively short anyways. And all the tool related things, all the updates can be in a PDF attachment. So hopefully that works, but it still leaves the following problem. And that is, how do you remember what the email was from 3 weeks ago, and how do you even find it in the 2,000 emails that have arrived since? So what we're also doing is we're going through this weekly email and are digesting it to have a digested digest. It's kind of getting convoluted, but on the MIT.nano website, on the user website, where we can then pull all the really relevant information out, not the reminders of training or other small things, but for instance, if we attach a list of laser micro machining vendors that we compiled last week, that's something we can post, or general the tool status updates and so on. Right? So if you've forgotten where the email is, no big problem. All the critical things will be on the MIT.nano user website, and you can find the link over here. So with that, that brings us kind of to the end of the presentation part, and we'll dive into the Q&A if there are any. So anywhere between 0 and 33 minutes in length. Just a few reminders, I guess. MIT.nano-feedback is where you can send us those questions, and we'll try to answer those on Fridays. And then the Happy Complaint Hour social is every Wednesday, 6 o'clock. The next one is actually in whatever it is, 3.5 hours tonight. And so with that, let me stop the recording, and we can go and go into the Q&A.